Hey everyone, we are thrilled to introduce you to a place very close to our heart, blushingintrovert.com, an online store of women's clothing and accessories that make the perfect gift. You see, they're passionate about spreading joy and promoting mental health awareness. Blushingintrovert.com carries cozy women's sweatshirts and quality accessories, journals, handmade gifts and stickers. Everything is in stock, ready to ship directly to your door. Inspired by the calling to give back, a portion of every purchase supports vital mental health initiatives. So your shopping experience with blushingintrovert.com truly makes a difference. So come check them out on either Etsy or at their online store at blushingintrovert.com and experience the warmth. Blushingintrovert.com, your happy place. Visit blushingintrovert.com today. Come join us as we dive deeper behind the scenes of security and cybercrime today, interviewing top technology leaders from around the world and sharing true cybercrime stories to raise awareness. News into business language we all understand. So please help us keep this going by subscribing for free to our YouTube channel and downloading our podcast episodes on Apple and Spotify so we can continue to bring you more of what matters. This is Cybercrime Junkies, and now the show. All right. Well, welcome everybody to Cybercrime Junkies. I am your host, David Morrow, and in the studio today, I am very honored to have with us JL Hancock. JL's got a fantastic story. He was a lead innovator at headquarters at the U.S. Navy SEALs Special Operations. Spent over 20 years in the military, fought in over 100 combat operations, and he's also an author of a fantastic book called The HAWK Enigma, which we're going to get into today. And he's an experienced practitioner, expert in emerging technologies. Jim, welcome to the podcast, sir.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
No, I'm really excited about it. So walk us through kind of where did you grow up? In like what part of the country did you grow up originally?
Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Albuquerque, New Mexico. Excellent. And then how did you find your way to the military?
9/11 actually. So it was
really?
It was almost completely motivated by that. Yeah.
That's phenomenal.
Yeah. So almost the same day, my buddy and I went down to the recruiting station. We'd actually already been down there for a different reason. I was slightly interested, but not completely hooked on the idea of joining the military. And then 9/11 more or less became what I felt was my generation's call to action. So
yeah, that's fantastic. And you didn't even know this because you can't see it, but I have an entire 9/11 wall on my wall right there. I've got the books from it, pictures, before and after, all there. I'll show you later.
Wow.
And then I've got some stuff here because I've lost a friend at the Pentagon that day, and it definitely inspired me to go into cybersecurity and defense overall. So
yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah. So you're like, so what drove you though to even consider it? I know 9/11 is that's the crux, that's the compelling event, right? But when you were growing up, did you take martial arts, defense, things like that? Were you into anything like that, or were you always into computers and writing? What?
I actually was in martial arts a lot. I used to compete internationally when I was in high school.
Really?
I fought in some tournaments in Australia and across the United States, the Junior Olympics and things like that. Very heavy to martial arts.
You were quite good then. You weren't like my podcast partner who like thinks he does martial arts, but he just goes to the strip mall over here and gets beaten up by 20-year-olds. I can tease him. He's not here today. So you actually competed. They flew you out to Australia. Holy cow. That's a big deal.
Yeah. We had to raise money, but 16 years old, fought in the World Cup Karate Championships. And martial arts were a big part of my life. The motivation for that was, growing up in Albuquerque wasn't exactly the safest of places.
Sure.
My older brother ended up getting jumped when I was 10, got put in the hospital.
Yeah.
And my grandparents were like, we don't want the same thing happening to, little
That'll
Jimmy.
Inspire a younger brother, right? That'll inspire you.
So at about 9 or 10, I started initially Taekwondo. And then from there, it's branched into, this was pre-UFC, pre-explosion of jiu-jitsu days.
Right.
My instructor that I ended up with was an 8th degree black belt, 3 martial arts. He founded his own martial art. This was the beginning of the eclectic form of combining different martial arts into one. Yeah. And he was in the International Martial Arts Hall of Fame. And so he was very big about making sure that we understood not just how to honor the traditional elements of martial arts, but how to apply them in the real world. And so it really was kind of the seeding ground before UFC and mixed martial arts became so big. There was a little bit of jiu-jitsu training, not a lot, but it was mainly about being able to deal with multiple opponents. And so but the big thing about martial arts for me when I was a kid was more about how to manage myself in difficult situations and gain confidence in that. And so that mixed with
confidence, discipline, right? The focus, situational awareness, I imagine, right?
Yeah. Yeah. All of those things. And so combine that with swimming. I was a very competitive swimmer for years. And then after I got out of high school, before I joined the military, I was a river guide. So I worked a lot. I was a whitewater kayaker and worked on the Colorado River as a river guide. Then joined the military. I also lived overseas for a little while. Lived in Japan, learned how to speak Japanese.
When was that? When you were still in high school or right after?
After high school, from 99 to 01, I lived in Japan.
And then 9/11 obviously compelled you to join and enlist. Which branch did you join in?
The Navy.
And so is there a reason you selected the Navy?
Yeah, I was interested in something called becoming a cryptologic technician interpretive. There are a bunch of different flavors of cryptologists in the Navy, and actually all branches of the military. Mm-hmm. And their specializations differ between, understanding how to exploit radio signals, radar. But I wanted to learn and manipulate foreign languages. And so I already spoke Japanese. And so I was like, well, they could send me to the Defense Language Institute where I would learn to speak another language. But as a cryptologist, you also have to have a really strong understanding of radio wave theory and RF propagation. And so it's a double-hatted element. And the Navy was the only branch that allowed you to be a CTI and operate on platforms in any domain. So I could be on subs undersea, I could be on the surface, I could fly, and I also could fight on the ground. No other branch offered all of those options.
Interesting. That's so for those of us that don't know the language or the definition of those terms, because a cryptologist is basically a term of art. It's a whole career. It's a whole study. What is cryptology?
So an easy way to think about that is you have ITs, information technologies professionals and their job is to make sure that people are able to communicate. And so that could be everything from your infrastructure for your computers to the radio waves that are propagating over through the air. Electronic warfare or electronic attack are individuals that use radio waves to make it difficult for things like using GPS or messing up your signals, right? Cryptologists,
they jam up the systems, right? We hear about that often in the news. Yeah,
electronic warfare is the usage of radio waves as a weapon. But in between those two is where the cryptologist lives. I want to know where you are emitting your energy. I want to know how you're communicating, and I want to position myself right in between so I can grab everything. And so that's why cryptologists end up becoming things like they're basically become hackers, and they were the predecessors for that. And then the vast majority of cryptologists work in all of us work in the intelligence communities. And
that's phenomenal. And you saw over 100 combat missions. What can you share with us kind of what that was generally without disclosing anything?
I think these
confidential, obviously, but I mean, were you involved in, drone use and and breaking when the opponent or the adversary was jamming signals, getting through, clearing that up, being able to decipher it? What was your involvement?
So the two main things that we would supply are things like indications and warning. So we would be monitoring the environment for certain activity, and then we could be able to, if there's certain energy being emitted, I could let you know where that energy is coming from. And then, so there's one aspect. The other thing is, if you watch a movie and for some reason there's a guy mixed in with the platoon and he has a computer and he's showing everybody where to go. Yeah. There's always that guy. That was me. I was that guy.
That's great. Yeah, that's exactly right. Because in the old days they would have a map, or they would intercept some like written thing, and they're going west, go this way, right? And now you're able to scan and decipher all that. Yeah, that's phenomenal. Yeah, I'm dating back just in case there's anybody that was born in the 1800s that's listening to this podcast. I just want them to be able to relate to us. Yeah. So that's really cool. So before we went live, you had mentioned that you were involved in one of the first operations that put an AI drone into combat. Can you share with us what that was? Because that sounds incredible.
Yeah, I think the first thing I should do is probably define an AI drone.
Yeah, because it sounds like something right out of Terminator. So I'd like to keep that visual in my mind to some degree.
Go ahead. So
thanks.
The vast majority, the drones that we use nowadays that everybody thinks are AI, they're basically automation.
Right.
But what I mean by that is the drone is able to get in the air. It knows its general altitude. It can fly from point A to point B. But if anything gets in its way, that drone's going to hit it. Right. Because the only thing it's really using is all the internal sensors to understand its GPS position. I'm being very, very, very general, but that's basically what most drones do.
Right.
Well, there are certain types of technology that allow you to use other sensors on board the drone. And the easiest way for me to describe it is that a drone needs to be able to see, think, and act.
And the thinking part is where the AI comes in.
Yeah, but the seeing part is the part that most drones don't have. Oh. Imagine if you built a dog. But the most important part of a dog is its nose, right? Mm-hmm. Well, the way we build most things nowadays is we build the dog first and add the nose later.
Right.
Whereas in order to build AI, you got to start with the nose. You build the drone around the nose. Build the dog around the nose. Because that's just the way that as a species, dogs evolve. What's the very first sensor on their body? The very first sensing ability that they have as they come out of the womb. And the answer is their nose. They can smell long before they can see and hear.
Right.
And so it's because it's the fundamental component of how they operate and understand their environment. Well, drones, if you have a dumb drone, the only way to understand its environment is through these other sensors, but it has no external sensors. So it needs to be able to see. What I mean by that is it needs to either have a camera, it needs to have a radar, it needs to have something that lets itself know where things are around it. So it can do things like something called SLAM, simultaneous localization and mapping. That is the ability for a drone to be able to identify landmarks at a distance. Okay. Now, most of the time that doesn't apply when you're flying at 25,000 feet because there's nothing out there.
Right.
Now, but the problem is if you're flying a drone inside of a building, the landmarks are all over you or all around you. Right. And so we started working with, when there's a longer story behind this, but we started playing with ready to fly RTF drones in the mid 2010s, right? 2014. And what we realized quickly is that a drone occupies your cognitive load in order to run it. You're constantly, if you are doing manual control, 6 degrees of freedom control, manipulating that drone, you are consumed mentally by what is happening. You can't focus on anything else. And for someone in combat, that's not good. You have to maintain situational awareness. You have to understand what's going on around you. And if you are off your gun and on the controllers, you are now you're not only personally vulnerable, but someone else has to protect you.
Right.
And so that's not going to work. So immediately we're like, well, how do we get it so these drones can conduct missions on their own without humans being able to interact? And then they cue us as to when something is relevant. And so we ended up searching for certain companies. We started with this one company that at the time, I think they maybe had 6 people total in the whole company. And we got them on a contract with the Defense Innovation Unit Experimental, now called DIU. And flash forward to now, that company is now worth about $3 billion. And their drones, 2018, we put their first drone in combat. What that drone did is it was able to fly up to a building, find the door, and then enter the building and search the entire building on its own. Like, you don't need to touch it. It does everything like that by itself.
Really? And sending back information about what it's seeing and everything else to command and control.
Yeah, you were able to watch the video the entire time. Now, the early iterations, all it could do is give you the video and a 2-dimensional map of the layout. Mm-hmm. So you understood where all the rooms were, the layout of the rooms, and you could see what was inside of them. The initial criticism of that was, well, I can knock it down with a broomstick. But for those of us on the warfighter side, we're like, well, yeah, but now I know where you are.
Right.
I know where you are relative to that building. I also know who is and isn't. And that was relevant to the tactics, techniques, and procedures we were employing at the time.
Sure.
Because
was this deployed on a field, like an open combat field, or was it urban combat?
It was the very first operation it was flown on it was kind of like a compound.
Okay.
So they had the location where it took place. There was multiple buildings. And there was only so many people in the platoon, and they were all occupied on one part of the compound. They couldn't divide their forces to clear both places. So while they held and controlled one, they sent the drone in the other.
Oh, excellent. So that they could know what to expect or what to avoid, etc.
Well, what was cool about it is they actually identified a house-borne IED right outside the door with the drone before they even went over there. So it actually saved their lives on that first mission. And so...
How did it do that? It was able to pick that up by visual or by...
They were able to visually detect
thermal?
it. I mean, granted, the human had to identify it was there because they didn't have computer vision that was sophisticated enough to identify that.
Right.
And even now, really, it's hard. Computer vision's hard. I ran a lot of projects for a defense contractor developing that, and computer vision is very difficult. The entry into it is easy, which gives you the impression that it's easy, when in reality it's very complicated. And so,
to get it accurate, right? To actually get it precise, to
get it reliable in dynamic environments is the part that is unique about that.
Yeah.
So that is the part that, go ahead.
Well, that's really useful. So that's phenomenal. So as you came out of the military, what type of, I mean, we interview so many people in the cybersecurity space, obviously, and there are so many that have gone into cybersecurity, cybersecurity is such a broad term, right? A lot of it is, it doesn't mean you're like managing a SOC necessarily, right? Or becoming an ethical hacker or red team. There's so many different aspects, but so many have transitioned from military because those skills are so transferable to the private sector in general, let alone within the cybersecurity space. What type of things have you engaged in post-military career?
I worked a lot with. For a long time, I managed our research and development projects for the government. Predominantly developing computer vision and autonomous robotic systems. I also consulted for some smaller companies developing different technologies. I worked with different things like unmanned ground vehicles, like robot dogs. I worked with maritime unmanned surface vehicles. I also developed concepts and innovation things for different parts of science and technology elements of the government. So predominantly working a lot with the future concepts within the government, but also application and systems engineering. So I used to run these things called limited objective experiments when I was in my old job. And every quarter, I would go up to this one military installation that was pretty isolated in the middle of nowhere, and I'd invite out some of, let's call them my friends, whether they be national laboratories or industry or whatever, people that I had a contract or technology that I was interested in pursuing. And we would do these integration events where we would try to get something to work. And I think the coolest example of one was, almost 6 years ago now that we did this, but we took a tethered drone that my buddy and I built in a trailer, connected a GoPro, tied that in through we had that running over fiber optic line back into a building, connected that into a tactical LTE network, connected that to a robot dog, and then connected that to a heads-up display and was able to actually control the robot dog through a Bluetooth controller on the gun while seeing the video feed from the robot dog and then also push in the feed from the tethered drone. And to tie all of that together, we did it in 3 days.
Wow. Well, and you can see the application of where that could go. Like that type of thing can be so useful for so many organizations, private sector and government.
The concept was super useful. More important to me, though, was
the dog.
The dog's cool. Dogs are cool.
Yeah, the dog's really cool.
Yeah. For me, it was, as you rip apart the problem from a systems engineering standpoint, you quickly realize the speed bumps and the part that's going to take longer for you and where you need to put your resources. So the resource management obviously is getting the certain robots working more efficiently. But when I would take this back to the government, I would say, look, you guys are building this thing over here and this group is building this thing over here. We really need to take a Christensen model of the whole innovator's dilemma idea of interoperability and focus more on how do we, as the government, articulate back to industry the appropriate ways for us to create modularity. And they were so busy fixating on the isolated capability that they wanted that they were not considering the long term down the road, how to tie them together. And specifically, they were not considering my favorite 3 letters, which are API or SDK, actually. So application programming interface, which allows 2 different software systems to talk to each other or to pull from one asset and that allows you to black box the capability through whether it be Kubernetes or a Docker. And then you're not worried about IP issues. All you're doing is basically saying, hey, I'm getting this JSON message that outputs the specific information that I need so that I can get your NMEA data for your position, right? So that's a real fancy way of saying this thing gives me a streaming video and tells me where it is. And then I apply my computer vision to it. And then they don't need to see how the computer vision works, but I get the ability from your drone and I don't have to touch anything other than giving your drone some basic directions. And so everybody's happy that those things can connect. But what's crazy is when the government buys its equipment, it doesn't articulate any of that. And so then we end up having to redo things over and over and over again. So the biggest capability that I offered back to my own organization was that systems engineering breakdown that I was doing at those experimentation events, because the other warfighters are too busy being like, yeah, that's a cool gun. Right. Yeah.
But this allowed them to have better productivity, better efficiency, reduce that time to having to go back and back and back and redo it all the time.
Time is one part. I would say money is the big one. So were we able to get to that end state? That's a work in progress. It comes down to, and actually I spent probably the last 2 years of my time in the Navy just running around pounding the whole interoperability ideology. It was almost became my religion that I was preaching to everybody, because I was so tired of having people walk in with their widget and then getting basically, here's a good example. You would walk in and they'd say, I need to create a universal interface for these cables. And I would say, well, the companies aren't incentivized for you to use a universal cable. Why? Because most of them are chipped. Now, for those listening, a chipped cable is, I can walk in and have a USB-C interface, which the nice thing about USB-C is because it's got those 19 pins. I can put it in any direction, which is great in the dark if I can't see, and it pops out. And then all you'd have to do is add a supplemental interface and I can screw it on so it won't come out. And then it's just a USB-C and it's got great gate throughput and it's also got power and all that good stuff. Well, these companies would come back and say, well, our cable is better than USB. And you're like, I doubt it. No, it's not. They're like, and so instead of charging me $5, $10 for a cable, they'll charge us literally thousands of dollars for one of these cables. Right. So the infrastructure is not incentivized to support that kind of thing, when you could literally dump so much stuff and it would be lighter and more efficient. That's just a cable example. The same thing is happening with software. And,
absolutely.
And so that was the kind of things that I ended up, I was surprised that I spent so much of my time combating that rather than chasing quantum computing and AI. It was all about APIs. Everything came back down to APIs.
Well, it's so true. We see a similar paradigm in cybersecurity. There's a lot of these startups that come out with like, this will cure all of your risk, all of your cyber risk in this one element. And then organizations don't know what to do. They're marketed by a vendor. They have this product or this thing that's supposed to really help them. And while it may operate in that one level, it's not cybersecurity overall. Like, cybersecurity is a process, right? There's a wide attack surface, right? And while that might clip one aspect of it, it's not the answer to an organization, right? And so, APIs are huge, right? Like, just there's all these disparate systems, like having them speak to one another, having it on a single pane of glass, all of that is so critical. It's interesting that you saw it in that environment specifically too. Wow. So, and that kind of kept up your time, right? Rather than focusing in on quantum computing and AI.
Yeah, it started getting there towards the end, and yeah. I'm getting sucked back in with other reasons for other things now, different projects that I'm running, but finally getting back to where I think I would think I'd rather we were.
Excellent. So let's segue to the topic of your book. Really interesting concept and great story line. And as I understand, you're working on a sequel that hopefully will be out in fruition relatively soon. And when that happens, we want to speak to you about that. But what drove you to want to write in the first place?
Yeah, so the book, I wrote a lot when I was younger, but didn't really think much of it as I became an adult until I had a small run-in with melanoma and found myself wanting to leave something behind for my kids, but didn't know how to do that. And having worked in the intelligence community for so long, I couldn't write nonfiction, right? Because there's certain things I just couldn't talk about.
Yeah, that's one of the challenges we have when we have a lot of guests on this podcast from the intelligence community, and they want to tell us certain stories and they can't, but they can tell us a different way, right? Or they're able to illustrate it in a different way. So you decided to package that up and actually write. Did you have a writing process? Did you know how to write, like professionally write?
I knew absolutely nothing. I just knew I needed to get it done. And then I became completely obsessed with the process. I started crushing master classes by people walking through their process. I just started devouring and consuming information on how to do it effectively while trying to produce as much as I could. And I was surprised at how quickly I was able to get something out. And then I started following a lot of the processes. And then eventually I had to pony up some money to get some editors to come back and say, all right, well, let's clean this up. And actually through that process, I was surprised how quickly I was able to pick up on it and create what I felt was a really good product. And the reviews have been, I've had some great editorial reviews. I was a finalist for a competition with through the Clive Cussler organization, and Dirk Cussler. I was a finalist in that as well as several other competitions recently. But the real thing about writing was about, I wanted to take some of the experiences that I had, kind of massage them a bit, and then work them into the story.
Sure. And so they're right. And that's a perfectly fine way of doing it, right? Like things that you've seen, advances, tactics, all of those things, you can weave into a fictional story because it's fiction. Yeah. Yeah. And that's what's fun also is as I've written more, some of the wacky ideas I've come up with in the past that nobody wanted to pick up on because they didn't want to put money behind it, I can just put in a book. Right.
That's
great.
So I might get in trouble later on down the road because they end up doing them. But I did have one project where they're like, we're going to do that. And I was like, don't do that because it's coming out in my next book. Then I'll get in trouble because I have to submit my books to the Pentagon. It's for review. And so it's the Defense Office Publication Security Review, and they're not very fast. But either way, then I don't get in trouble for putting out something that's not supposed to be out there.
Oh my, I didn't even know that you were required to do that. but
Yeah. If you've had a clearance, you have to do that.
Yeah.
If it's related to the military, you have to.
Yeah.
You can choose not to, but then you'd have all of it. You get in a lot of legal trouble later on.
Yeah, like going against the Defense Department, probably not a great idea for a U.S. citizen.
Yeah.
So like high level, walk us through what's the book about. Like tell us generally what the story is.
I've described this so many times, but I think the easiest way to look at it is this: imagine if Q from James Bond also went out on combat missions. Okay. And so that's kind of like your main character. But one of the things that I also go over a lot is the difficulties of post-traumatic stress. And then I dig into artificial intelligence a great deal. And then the premise of this story is the main character, who is this Q kind of character, he has these recurring nightmares every night. And because he's not James Bond, he's not the Navy SEAL or whatever, he feels that he doesn't deserve to deal with it the same way those other guys do. He doesn't deserve to take the resources at his disposal, and he doesn't want to look weak. At the same time, he doesn't have the vices, like he doesn't drink and he doesn't have these problems at home. He deals with his problems by burying himself in his work. Well, it eventually starts catching up to him, and he starts hearing these voices at night in his dreams that are warning him about the future. He thinks he's losing his mind. And at the same time, the scientists in Japan that are working on something called the God algorithm go missing, and one of them happens to be an American citizen. So this task force is asked to go find them, and he gets pulled into the task force, and he soon realizes that maybe he's not going crazy, and these voices are tied to something real.
Interesting. That's fantastic. So we will have links to the book in our show notes. We encourage everybody to check it out. It is really, really cool. And as you're explaining it to me, I'm like, I see so many parallels for your own experiences in there as you're describing it, right? Like so many things there could be things you can draw on from your real life experience. Not telling a story of what really happened or something that's confidential, but you're able to draw from those experiences and then take creative license.
Yeah, no, that absolutely is what happened. And in certain cases, like the cool thing is now I can show it to my kids and I can be like, yeah, that was real. Right. And that was real.
Yeah.
That's tweaked. That was my friend.
Right. Exactly.
So
that's so cool. And is the God algorithm something almost like quantum computing, or is there a parallel there? Meaning like it's something that could arguably be used to decrypt all the things that are encrypted, like currently.
No.
Okay.
So one thing I pride myself in is here are the two crutches that I think that authors fall into nowadays when it comes to AI. The disembodied, omniscient voice that is AI. If somebody brings up AI, they're like, oh, it's a voice that knows all. Okay. Yeah, no, I don't. No. If you know enough about AI, you'll understand that AI in general is a Play-Doh extruder. It's you shove something in and then it squeezes something out. Okay. Right. Sometimes there are multiple steps that can take place in that, and I'm simplifying it a great deal. And it is extremely impressive. And it is breaking what we traditionally know as the Turing test. But it is, once again, it's a Play-Doh extruder. Quantum doesn't operate like regular computing. And so it's not a one-for-one comparison that if you have a big quantum computer, it's going to operate like a GPU or a CPU. It doesn't. Every single aspect of its capability has to be programmed. And if you sit and really talk to quantum scientists, they're like, I don't really know what's going on. I also don't really know how to use this thing. And so it's so nebulous. So the two things that I would say is quantum usually defaults to time travel. That's one of them. Exactly. And then the other one, because it is what it is. And then the other one is that AI means a self-aware Terminator type thing. And that's, I do not use those. And it is a technologically heavy book. However, I think it is the one thing I pride myself in is that it is digestible for the masses, and then you will immediately understand the implications of it as it builds up. So it's easy to understand, but it doesn't fall into those tropes. It's different. It's very different.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're doing a lot with AI. You've written about it and you've experimented with it. What are some of the What are some of the dangers that are out there right now? I mean, AI has been around actually for quite a while. Like generative AI really kind of hit the presses in November of last year, about a year and a month or so ago. We saw, in the cybersecurity field, we saw a lot of missteps. We saw cyber criminals leveraging it. It cleaned up their phishing attempts. They were able to launch faster, all of that. So that kind of sped things up. We saw it on the creative end massively, right? Like every organization has a AI facet to it now. It's really big in the marketing aspect and some of the processes and, generating images, articles, all of that. But what are some of the challenges or the dangers out there right now as we keep embarking with it?
I think so. A couple things on that. The other day, I moderated a podcast myself for an event I'm running with the government next week. And one of the people that I interviewed was the CEO of a penetration testing company. And we were asking him this very similar question. And one of the examples he gave was, he said, I came across our first issue with AI kind of at a pretty deep level with a company that we were supporting that had integrated a large language model chatbot into their company. And the chatbot, what it would allow you to do is you could say, well, where can I find these files? What do I need to do for this job? And it would tell you. It knew how to do everything. And they said, well, how do we get access to these repositories? And the chatbot said, well, you get access to these, but only people that, and then they said, well, who has access to those? And it said, you have to be defined as an administrator in order to do that.
Right.
And so they went in and they realized they could, this is on top of, he said, every other aspect of their security from a cyber standpoint was locked up tight, like a quant.
Yep.
If anybody knows anything about Wall Street, quant analysts and the stuff they do, that is the tightest security you could probably find anywhere. Mm-hmm. Because that is billions of dollars lost if that information is exploited. Yeah. He said it was basically locked up tight like that, but they had this bot. So we asked the bot, how do we gain access? And they said, you need to be defined as an administrator. So they went back to all of their personal profiles they created in the company and then just changed their title to administrator. And then it allowed them straight in. And
they socially engineered the bot.
They used human engineering to manipulate the bot. Now, that wasn't the AI exploiting that. It was the AI creating a vulnerability they hadn't anticipated.
Right.
And so there's other aspects we discussed about how in the future you'll be able to integrate malware into machine learning models that can be exploited later on, because if you break something apart into pieces and then reassemble it as part of the model, you've created a vector by which you could integrate malware. And conversely, you could have it ingest good code that gets aggregated on the inside that corrupts the model because it teaches it to basically ignore good code and or identify it, kind of like you give the system lupus because now it's attacking itself. Right. So those are things that we saw on that side, but that's a cybersecurity element. For me personally, when it comes to AI, the thing that concerns me the most is that the current manifestations of AI and every model that you're creating, AI is dependent upon the data available, and the data available creates a model that is nothing more than a reflection of ourselves. And the issues we are seeing are the issues that we are creating amongst ourselves. And the ones that I worry the most about is the way that we consume information to reinforce worldviews, not to learn the truth. It's because we have each of us
confirmation bias, like almost like AI infused confirmation bias.
Exactly. And then the way that you gain traction on social media is with quantity. So the more you're able to put out, and now if you can automate those processes with artificial intelligence, you're able to gain more traction, move faster, create more content, which other people constantly consume when they're scrolling. Mm-hmm. And so that is the issue I see, because we're not consuming information with the intent of, for example, how often do you hear a piece of information and then go back to fact check it? Most of the time, we consume it as a factoid, as if it were true. Mm-hmm. And then it reinforces our confirmation bias, and then we go about our business. I am mostly concerned that AI won't in itself become sentient and become the threat. It will more or less reinforce the threats that exist and become an acceleration accelerating catalyst for behaviors that we already have in place. That
right, and then
concerns
it
me
could
the
be
most.
leveraged across social media and all these other platforms too, right?
Yeah. Like looking
Yeah.
at examples like Cambridge
That's a
Analytica.
great way of saying it. That's a great perspective on it. I would agree completely. Yeah, I mean that's exactly what we're seeing.
Yeah.
And I think we'll see a lot more in 2024 with an election coming up and everything else. So there's a lot of things heading our way.
As we ingest information, especially if you are allowing social media to be your primary means of gathering information, realize, of course, that the algorithm is pushing you things that are gaining traction, and none of those things. What baffles me is that the platforms have gone from a means of sharing our lives with each other to a means of, especially if I look at my feeds, no matter how often I delete my history, I feel like I'm getting constant intel reports, but I can't determine which one's true.
Right.
Because everybody's putting things out as if it's factual. This happened, then this happened. Like, did it? Right. Or they're reposting something that somebody else put out. Now the bots can just continue to do more of that. Now we all know these things. We all know that different tools are scraping data. They're able to aggregate, focus our ad ID information, and correlate that to your IP address. And now you can create more advanced psychographic information that can then tailor particular advertisements, marketing, all those things to you as an individual. The easiest way to deal with that is you literally just turn something off and it no longer has any impact in your life. And it's just the problem is very few of us have that discipline to do it.
No, and part of what it takes to build a brand, whether it's your personal brand or the organization's brand that you serve, is to engage in it, right?
Yep.
And so it's definitely a double-edged sword. I mean, I also know one of the other errors that were done right off the bat with generative AI is we saw several organizations, let's say in dev coding, right? Like application development, they were putting in code into AI to fix the bugs and it was spitting back out. It was great. What they didn't realize is when they did that, it was then essentially public, right? And then other people were able to go in and say, what's the source code for this platform? And what's this? And they were getting it all because they had been putting it in there to have it help fix the bugs.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's not AI's fault. That's human error on the behalf of the coders, but it's also human error on behalf of the organizations to not create those policies, right? About like either create an ecosystem that keeps that contained or create policies so that can't be done.
So I've told this story several times in other podcasts. So I'll just go ahead and tell it again. But when in 2019, I went to a machine learning conference in Palo Alto hosted by a company called Matroid. It was called the Scaled AI Conference. And you had Facebook and Intel and all these different companies there. And then at the time, OpenAI came up and they had just defeated Dota, Defense Against the Ancients, is a computer game that was very popular. And they had just created a bot that could defeat that. And they're creating their initial variants of GPT, right? And they were up there speaking, and one of the individuals raised their hand and was asking if they've passed the Turing test and all these different questions. And I remember I turned to my colleague who was sitting next to me at the event, and I said, think we should go talk to these guys? And my buddy said, they call themselves OpenAI because they are open. Right. They are just as likely to work with us as they are to work with China. And they're just as likely to share with us as they are to anybody in the public. And I was like, check. Yeah, I was like, that's a good point. And I don't think I need to talk to them. And what's interesting is when they went public, they were doing all the things that I feared they would do, which is just as you said, any interface or any information that you put in there in order to gain better information goes in and gets aggregated as part of their whole, right, and then it becomes accessible to everyone else inside. And so for better or for worse, that the black boxing of the neural networks, that is the issue. The biggest issue there is they don't know how the neural net is prioritizing the data that it has received in order to create its linear regression models to prioritize what it puts out, which is on the statistical whatever, So that's a lot of gobbledygook to say they don't know what's going on. That another person that was talking to me, he's a bit of a conspiracy theorist. He's like, they don't know what's going on, dude. I bet it's self-aware. And I'm like, there's a jump.
Yeah, exactly.
I bet it's not. I bet what's actually happening is there's so much data in there that the thing they don't understand is, like I said, they don't know how it's prioritizing what it's going to put out.
Right.
And because of that, it becomes concerning when it confabulates. They used to use the term hallucinating, then everybody got upset because you don't hallucinate verbally, you confabulate, right? So, which is a semantic argument, not so much the fact that
That's so funny that you said that, because when that first came out, I was like, how's this thing hallucinating visually? Like, it's spitting out data. And yeah, you're right. So it's confabulating.
Right. So yeah, but it confabulates because that is what the model created, right? And it can get better over time, and it's a really great tool. The thing that concerns me is with this massively great tool that you're giving the API to anybody to use it however they want. I think that's just completely stupid. There's Dolly and Google, they were doing a great job. Not so much Dolly, but so that's not Google, but the development of Bard, they basically were like, we're going to roll it out simple, because the easiest way to use it is just like an enhanced search feature.
Right.
And it works great in that sense, as long as you recognize that whatever it puts out, you need to go back and fact check, and you need to go back and fix.
It's great for ideation, right? For ideating when you're writing something, right? You're writing a blog or whatever. You can spit something in. It can give you some bullet points, and then from there you can kind of take it and.
I use it all the time to find a better way to phrase something. Like I'll be like, I hate the way I'm phrasing this. Please help me find a new way to say it. And then
and it'll come up with things, and you're like, oh, I could have thought of that. Like, that's so great. It did what you were thinking of doing, just faster. Like, you're like, that saved me time. That's good.
But it's also rare that I take it word for word the way that they gave it to me.
No,
I usually take it piecemeal, right? Because I'm like, and I don't see how that's any different than me bouncing it off one of my friends.
Right.
That's
exactly right.
It's a great tool, and these are lots of things to benefit, but the power of them. So with robotics, for example, we always refer to it as the 3 Ds of autonomy and AI. They should be able to handle the dull, the dirty, and the dangerous. The things that we as humans don't want to do, right? And so I don't want to send those drones that I mentioned, for example, they're being used in Israel to deal with the tunnels that Hamas built because they don't want to send people down there.
Right.
Send the robot. Now I have a general situational awareness, and if they blow it up or they destroy the drone, I don't care. Didn't hurt a person. Right. The person's not dead. The drone died. The drone can all along. It's fine. Yep. Which is the other part of the conversation when it comes to the Terminator thing that you just mentioned earlier, right? Mm-hmm. People think that the development of robotics and AI is going to become, once again, self-aware and then killing machines and blah, blah, blah. For one, we're so far from that. Second of all, we use those robotics to mitigate risk. And I'm going to give, this is a little bit of a controversial example, but I think it's the best one because it will hit home. I watched the video of the police officers that were clearing the building after the Breonna Taylor incident. Mm-hmm. And with that incident, it was a very tragic situation. You also had these horrible policies inside of the state where they were in direct conflict with each other. Why do you have no-knock warrants in a state where you have the ability to defend your home with a gun? Right. You're just asking for someone to get shot. It's a terrible, terrible policy. That was so stupid. And then on the role of the officers trying to break in. Now, whether they were justified in getting in, I'm not going to argue any of those things. They were both basically doing what they were legally allowed to do. Right. Both sides. But what's funny, not so much funny, is when I watched the SWAT team or whatever who entered the building, I could tell by the way that they were holding their guns that they had been trained by somebody in my old community. Really? I could just tell. Yeah. But they weren't doing it right. They were doing some pieces wrong. And they were stacking and they were aggressively moving. And I remember thinking about a lot of the ops we were doing before I left. And what we started doing were our aggression level started decreasing because we weren't as concerned with time. And what I mean by that is initially, like in Iraq, when we would hit targets, we'd move as fast as we could, get in there, get out. Because not so much the fact that we were trying to be sneaky, but we were being sneaky because we were worried about people in that neighborhood coming around and attacking us. Right? We didn't want to get attacked. We didn't want to get flanked. Police don't have to worry about getting flanked. Right. Right? They can take their time in certain cases. Are they worried about evidence being destroyed, whatever? There's different reasons why they could justify that. But if you can set blocking positions and cover down and cordon off a street, you can block people from running. And if you can block people from running, what's the reason for coming in aggressively hot and heavy with a gun? And so for me, I'm like, but what if I could just send in a drone? And the drone then, it's not armed. It's just a camera. It's a little alarming because there's a drone in your house. But what's more alarming, a drone in your house or a guy with a gun?
Right. Or six guys with guns. Right.
Give me the drone every day of the week. That way, at least, especially if the drones nowadays, you can communicate two ways with the drone. You can talk to the drone and they can speak back to you what they want.
Right.
The officer can be literally like 500 a click away from the target, from the particular building. And the civilians on the inside they'll be like, no, I don't want this drone flying in my house, but wow, I'm so glad it's a drone. And we can actually communicate the problem. Hey, I need you guys to come out with your arms up. Okay. Yeah. And if you refuse to do that, I'm like, okay, now I know the level of hostility in the house. I know what mental state you're in, right? I know what I'm actually dealing with instead of I'm running into a dark home with a gun with no night vision, right? All those, that is the part of the narrative that I think is lost all the time when it comes to the future of robotics and warfare is it has the ability to mitigate risk to people in light of all of these human created problems. And it allows we are not surrendering the decision-making processes to drones. We are just allowing us to remove emotions from the equation. Yep. And that's what really will make it better.
That's fantastic. That's absolutely brilliant. Jim J.L. Hancock, thank you so much for your insight. What is on the horizon for you? What's coming up? I spilled the beans earlier by saying your segue, your next book is going to be coming out. But what can you share about what the near term future holds for you?
So the big thing is, I got another book coming out. That's a sequel to the first one. And I referenced something called an AI war. And the AI war is going to keep increasing. And I'll be doing a lot more writing. And then in my personal life, I'm going to keep sticking with the industry that I've been telling you about. And I'll be continuing to do a lot more work there. But in the future, I just hope to reach out to more people so that they can continue to learn about some of these topics that I'm trying to help inform the public about.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. Please, I hope it's not the last time you're on with us. We welcome you back, especially after your next book comes out. And I'm sure there will be many other stories, and I'm sure you had a whole bunch that you could have shared that I just didn't pry you on. But we look forward to that discussion as well.
No, thank you. Great to be here. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, buddy. Links to J.L. Hancock will be below, his socials, as well as the link to his first book. And then we will have updates as that second book gets released. We thank everybody for listening. Well, that wraps this up. Thanks for joining, everybody. Hope you got value out of digging deeper behind the scenes of security and cybercrime today. Please don't forget to help keep this going by subscribing free to our YouTube channel at Cybercrime Junkies Podcast, and download and enjoy all of our past episodes on Apple and Spotify podcasts so we can continue to bring you more of what matters. This is Cybercrime Junkies, and we thank you for joining us.